on with Dr. Don Salvo and Joe Montaldo. Hope everyone's having a great evening or a great afternoon. I know the show goes out worldwide, and I know on a lot of the other shows we welcome everyone from around the world, but this show is particularly just mostly the United States and what I would call, well, I guess you'd call it Eastern Europe. So welcome everybody to the show tonight, and I hope everybody is having a good day. I know with the COVID stuff going on and everybody's all cranky, running around like mad, insane people. I own three different businesses. Well, I should say two businesses and a research company. And most normally people that I normally know that are very calm, very relaxed, very businesslike, very well educated, very wealthy, are acting like 12-year-olds. I mean, temper tantrum, stomping their feet. I'm like, where are we like living on another planet? And for some reason, all customer service, customer service is shaky to start off with in the world, but it tends to be right now just even more impossible. So I want everybody
Oh
out there to
yeah.
chill out, listen, enjoy the show. We got a good guest on tonight. That's a good topic matter. A couple other things real quick. Don't forget, Folgers does partially sponsor this show, so be sure you're drinking some Folgers. Look, as you can see, Folgers in my cup. Plus that, guys, so, Christmas Cup for all them crybabies has been writing on about me about the Christmas Cup. Hey, we're getting close, 7 months, 6 months, whatever, 5 months actually now, huh? So, yes, it's coming, people. Hopefully, we'll have some money and a little less COVID at the time. And one other thing before we go, you can always reach us at iCarCox.net. You can catch us on any of the Facebook pages. You can write to the station from the station page itself. But we're always looking for good guests. We're always looking for particular topic matter. This is a show that is actually listed under the variety category, so you can send us a wide range of topics. But we like doing a lot of science. We like doing a lot of research-based stuff. So John and I are both researchers by nature, so it's one of those things we like to do. But anyway, like I said, or you can catch John. John's all over Facebook. So he's usually hanging out, chit chatting, or hanging out and talking to the different fans and stuff. So drop him a line, say, hey, I'd like to see such and such on the show. And if you've got a contact information or somebody we've had in the past, let us know. On that note, I'm going to introduce you to Dr. Don DeSalvo and give him the floor. John, how you doing, baby?
Yeah, pretty good, Joe. Kind of excited about the new show coming up next
Oh,
Saturday. Just to
I
let
know.
everyone know, we were scheduled to start tomorrow, but we're putting it off a week because we're adding some co-hosts, and that's the Wise Guys Incorporated. The I guess you could say the Mafia show. It will premiere next Saturday, 3 to 4 p.m. Central Time. Correct, Joe?
Yep,
3 to 4
3 to 4,
p.m.
3 Central Time.
And we're having
It'll be a great show, too.
in fact, we're gonna add in another co-host, the son of the one of the sons, well, the son of the boss of the Colombo family.
You
Um,
know, it's interesting you said that because Michelle DeRoche, I'll be following y'all on this Saturday because it's our monthly show, The Gray Zone, and we're going to be talking about afterlife. It's just a kind of a fitting topic for after a
oh,
mafia show.
yes,
I'm just saying, it just kind of worked out that way.
well, it's funny. He's on witness protection, or just coming off it. And we had a long phone conversation today about the show, and he's the first show next week is going to be what it's like to be on witness protection. Here's a guy who was, which is going to be fascinating. All the myths will be thrown out. So I wanted to get a big plug in for that, and maybe I can introduce Barrie now. I've known Barrie. First of all, welcome Barrie to the show, and thanks for coming on.
My pleasure, John. Good to be here with you.
Well, Barrie, I have known right for about 40 years because we met right after the Turin, I guess, exposition and research. So I think we met like in '79 or '80 through
Yeah,
Paul
I'm
Malone.
sure. I'm sure it was that right and around in that range. I don't remember the exact time or meeting, but that was 42 years ago. So
Wow, and most people can't stand me for 40 minutes, and Barry's been my friend for 40 years. And before I give him a formal introduction, I have to
I
say,
know.
with
I think
with,
that
with
earns
all
him a
the
place in
people
heaven.
with all the with all the people in the world studying the Shroud of Turin and all the experts, Barry, to me, in my opinion, I'm not saying this because he's my friend, is the most knowledgeable person in almost every area on the Shroud, and probably one of the nicest, kindest, humblest person that has been involved in it. And you'll see why when he starts. Oh, great! Something just covered up your introduction. But anyway, Barrie Schwortz was the official documenting photographer of the Shroud of Turin research project, which meant in 1978, when the Stirrup team, Shroud of Turin research project, went to Turin, Italy, and conducted 5 days of extensive research on the shroud. Barrie documented it all with photographs. He's got everything. And I know Barrie supplied me with slides when I started going on my lecture circuit, and always been, I tell you, a very generous and kind person to me. And he has the #1 shroud research website in the world. It is totally amazing. Everything is there. The high quality photos. I mean, there's nothing you could want to know about the shroud that's not on his website, and it's shroud.com. Really, I don't know how the hell you got that, but that must have been that
In,
was
in 1995, Shroud.com was available.
amazing. Well,
That
you
is
had to
amazing.
were smart to grab it, and
Well, you know,
I,
everyone makes a big issue of our being #1 organic on Google. And I have to point out to people that we're 2 years older than Google. So
wow, wow, and
within the
I know
night,
you get like, don't you get like about 10 million visitors, and
well, over the years, we're somewhere beyond 16 million. It's kind of hard to keep tabs. We've had to move the site to a different server, and it kind of munged up the statistics and data for a bit. So, but we typically have 1.5 to 2 million visitors a year.
wow. And what I like about Barrie so much, being a retired university professor and dean, is Barrie founded the Shroud of Turin Education and Research Association, known as STERA, which is a nonprofit corporation. Actually, he donated his website and his extensive shroud photographic collection in order to really to maintain and preserve these materials and make them available for future research. So, as an educator and somebody in academia, oops, I keep hitting my mic. This was really a gift that you did to the world, and allowed a lot of students and researchers to have access to information. And one of the things with Barrie is, and Barrie does lecture all over the place, and he's been all over TV. I don't even have to mention the stations, History Channel,
Please
Sci-Fi,
don't.
you know, Most Wanted, right?
The frustration is this, and I constantly have to remind people that I never intended to get in front of the camera. I spent 50 years as a professional photographer behind the camera, which is where I'm always most comfortable. But building that website back in '96, who knew that the internet was going to do what it did? I wasn't smart enough to know. I mean, if I'd have been that smart, I'd have bought Microsoft and Apple at $1 a share. That would have been prescient then. But I built the website not realizing what was going to happen. And the main motivation was this: back in the mid '90s, before the internet kicked in, who had access to research papers that were in peer-reviewed scientific journals unless you went to an academic research library at a university or someplace? They weren't available. And so my frustration sitting on all this material was that I was frustrated by the media and the terrible reporting about the shroud. And so I felt that the public had a right to have access to the same materials that I had access to, that ultimately convinced me the shroud is authentic. And when I say that, I should remind the listener that I was raised in an Orthodox Jewish home, so I didn't have any emotional attachment to the subject matter and could pretty much view it with no emotional bias. Not that that's a bad thing. I'm sure some of our team members did feel some emotion because of what we were doing. But for me, it was basically just another scientific research project, and I had participated in many before and, of course, since.
Right. In fact, my first question was going to be, how did a nice Jewish boy like you get involved in the shroud? But
Well,
again, Jesus was Jewish, so I guess
yeah.
that's an easy
Well,
question to answer.
Well, but there actually is a good answer to that, and I think it's probably good that I tell you. I operated a commercial photography studio in Santa Barbara, California, and I did a lot of scientific, medical, aerospace, and commercial work. And when have a commercial studio, you take what jobs come in.
Right.
I did a 7-month project with a company in Santa Barbara that was a contractor to Los Alamos National Laboratories. And I worked with a gentleman named Don Devan, who was an imaging scientist working at this company. The project was for Los Alamos, so obviously it had something to do with atomic bombs, and that's all I can say about it. But that's what we did for 7 months. And it turns out that if just a month or so later, Don Devan, the man I'd worked with, participated in the evaluation of an image of the shroud over at Sandia Laboratories, where they put an image of the shroud into a device called a VP8 image analyzer that takes the lights and darks of an image and just stretches them into vertical 3D space proportionate to each other. And when they did that, they discovered that there was spatial or topographical information encoded into the image of the shroud. And they said, wow, we got to put a team together and see if we can get permission to examine it. And they said to Don, hey, we're going to need to find a photographer. Anybody know one? Well, I had just finished working with Don. So Don called me up and he said, hey, and of course, I'm hoping it's another project like the Los Alamos job. And he goes, well, not exactly. He says, what do you know about the Shroud of Turin? Well, I laughed and I said, but Don, I'm Jewish. And Don laughed and he said, so am I, remember? Don was one of the other Jewish team members. There were 3 of us on the team, as well as a couple of Catholics, some evangelicals, some Protestants. Vern Miller, the chief scientific photographer, is a Mormon. So we were a very diverse group, and we were really there for the science, not the faith. But anyway, that's how I got involved. Of course, when Don told me about it and asked me if I wanted to participate, I said no. And I said, nah, I don't think I want to get involved in this. But there was something about that image property that I knew I couldn't duplicate with photography or artwork that kind of caught my scientific curiosity. So I eventually agreed to say yes. Unfortunately, within a month or 2, I was still regretful of my decision and I was going to quit. And by then, 2 new team members had joined us from the Jet Propulsion Lab, Don Lynn and John Lohr. Don Lynn was head of imaging for Voyager, Viking, Mariner, and Galileo projects, all the solar system projects of NASA. And he happened to be Catholic. And I remember saying to him one day, gee, Don, what's a nice Jewish boy like me doing here? And he looked at me, he said, well, apparently you've forgotten that the man in question is a Jew. And I said, no, I knew that. And he said, so you don't think God wants one of his chosen people on our team? And I just laughed at that point. I said, no, I never thought that either. And so in the end, he gave me probably what was the soundest advice anybody's given me. He told me to shut up and stop complaining and go to Turin and do the best job I could do. And he added, God doesn't tell us in advance what the plan is, but one day you'll know.
That's
and
great.
That's what kept me on the team.
You know, the story I like is, and I'll let you tell it. You walked in thinking you were going to look at it and kind of say, it's a forgery. And tell us that.
Yeah,
that first approach.
Thank God there wasn't an internet at that moment in time, or those words would still be out there. But basically, I said to a reporter, I said, give us 5 minutes. We'll find the paint and come home.
Great.
Now, it's from that moment on, it's about 43 or 44 years later. And there is no paint.
I don't know if you want, maybe give a little description of the shroud, if you could, Barry. And then I wanted to spend a lot of time on the image formation and the theories too. But for listeners maybe that aren't as familiar with the, what the shroud is and what's on it, could you do that?
I can certainly do that. The shroud is a 14.5 foot long, 3.5 foot wide sheet of pure linen, which is required, by the way, by Jewish law for anyone of high stature. It must be pure linen with no mixing of the kinds, no mixing of wool or cotton in with the linen. But what's unique about it, aside from the fact it's been damaged several times in fires, is that it bears the full ventral, front, and dorsal back image of a man who has been scourged and beaten and speared in the side and crowned with a cap or crown of thorns. And there are crucifixion wounds in his hands and in his feet. And forensically, the image on the shroud matches 100% what the Gospels say was done to Jesus, but more importantly, they have done so with such forensic accuracy that a number of expert forensic pathologists who've studied the shroud say that the only way that image could have gotten there was by wrapping the body of a man.
Interesting. And what do we know
So,
about the history? When did it first show up that we
well,
can say for
it,
sure?
when can we say that it showed up for sure? It shows up in the mid 1300s in France, and then eventually finds its way over to Turin. By then, it had been part of a dowry and became a part of the Savoy family, who were the monarchy of Italy. And there was a bishop who was ill in Italy, in Milan, but he wanted to venerate the shroud in hopes that it would help cure his illness. But he was too sick to travel to France where the shroud was, so they brought it over the Alps to Turin, and it's remained there to this day. So that's how it got to Turin and why it's now called the Shroud of Turin. But there was earlier cloth mentioned in earlier writings and historical writings about a cloth called the mandilion, which I believe in Greek means, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, John, not made by a human hand or not made by hand,
Correct.
implying that not an artwork. And of course, that was the conventional wisdom that prompted our team's research. Was we wanted to know what formed the image, and all of our tests were designed to be A, non-destructive, so we caused no harm to the cloth, and B, such that they could help us answer that single question: how was the image formed? And at that moment in history, the big theories were: one, it was a painting. Two, it was a scorch. Somebody heated a metal statue and scorched the image onto it. And the third was that it might have been made photographically, and some people, laughingly, in my opinion, say Leonardo da Vinci did it. But the shroud is documented in the historic record, documented being displayed 100 years before da Vinci was born. He was a good artist, but he wasn't that good. So,
Well, you said something important. The image of Odessa. I remember because I was like a consultant to the team and worked with a lot of the members. I saw, oh God, I think it was back in the 80s, the X-rays of that were taken, and you could actually see the fold marks where the shroud would have been folded, and like in four, I think, Barry, and the face would have been perfectly in the center and matched the
that's
image of
correct.
Odessa. Is that correct on that?
Yeah, let me give a little more background so it makes it even clearer. There was something called the image of Odessa that was displayed in Constantinople, which is now Urfa, Turkey. But it only showed the face. Well, when the shroud was unfolded and we examined it, we did some cross lighting to kind of emphasize what creases and folds might have been there. We could clearly see where it had been folded in quarters, so that when folded that way, the panel that you have left has the face right in the middle of it. So it's
Amazing.
very
Yep.
similar to the illustrations in illuminated manuscripts that show the mandilion, and you can see that it's very similar to the image of the shroud. And you can look at the artworks going back to the Orthodox Church in the 4th and 5th centuries. There's some very famous paintings done of Jesus. You know which one I'm talking about, John, the Christ Pantocrator.
Right. Oh, yes. Right. Right.
And if you look at that and you look at the shroud, you realize that one of these must have been the format that the other was based on. And that's what we can see from the shroud. So there is evidence of it much earlier in the historical record, but the unbroken chain of custody starts about mid 1300s. And of course, from there, we have a clear, accurate history of it virtually for every day of its existence.
Why I wanted you to go into that, because I'm so sick of hearing you are too, I'm sure, Da Vinci, the Renaissance, the camera obscura, right, Barry? And it's like,
Well,
wait,
you
Why
know,
y'all hating on Da Vinci?
that was one of the theories that was proposed, that it was made by photographic means. Well, the gentleman who did that was an art professor, art history professor in South Africa, Nicholas Allen. And look, I give this man great credit. He actually made a silver solution out of what would have been available in medieval times. He got a statue of a man. He built a camera obscura. He exposed a piece of cloth for 4 days, I might add, to create the exposure. Then he processed it, and ironically, to stop the action of the developer, he used his own urine as a fixer, if you will, because the uric acid in urine probably would function that way. I often refer to his work as the Shroud of Urine, but
I'm glad you said it, not me.
well, I figure I might as well. I'm in trouble with everybody already. So,
Love
but
it.
no. So look, Nicholas Allen, the one thing I admired about him, he didn't just talk it or write a book about it. Eventually he did, of course, but he actually went out and he did the experiment. And every one of the scientists on the STIRP team would have congratulated him and pat him on the back, even if they disagreed with his conclusions, for doing good science. And that's why I will always give nice credit to Nicholas, but he failed to do one thing that I did in a follow-up paper to his, and that was I compared his result to one of my photographs of the shroud, and the differences are dramatically different. You know, his photographic image had a very distinct and sharp edge, but we know that the shroud was not made by light the way a photographic image is made, and it doesn't have any defined edges because the image density on the shroud is based on how close the cloth was to the body, and as the distance increased, the image grows more faint until it reaches extinction at about 3.5, 4 centimeters. What that tells you is there can't be distinct edges because as the distance increased, the image just faded away. That also makes it difficult to do measurements from the shroud. Where do you start and where do you end your measurements? So you can see that Nicholas Allen did something really good until we made the comparison. He had a very strong lighting effect from up above. And so there were shadows cast under the chin, under the hands of the sculpture he photographed. And there's nothing like that on the shroud. There's no directionality of light because light wasn't responsible for the image. More than anything else, however, the silver that he soaked his cloth into, once he used his fixer solution, the only silver that would have remained would have been where the image is. Silver in the photographic process, the fixer removes the unused silver, and what remains is the image, and that's still silver. We found 0 silver on the shroud, and we were looking for it because we thought that the early fire damage caused by one of those fires, some molten silver may have dropped onto the cloth, and we did find one little microscopic bead of silver, but there was no silver anywhere else on that cloth, and we could measure down to 1 part per billion. And so if you soak a woven cloth in a silver solution, there's nothing you're ever going to do to get rid of all the silver. And we found 0 on that cloth.
Now that image wasn't a surface phenomenon like the shroud, right? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because that's really an important characteristic of the shroud.
His silver salt solution soaked into the cloth, even penetrating deeper into the fibers below the surface fibers that are the ones visible. The image on the shroud is on the top layer of the surface fibers only. So Nicholas Allen's technique under the microscope yields a completely different result than what we see on the shroud.
It's amazing.
You know, it's interesting y'all said that because right now on the left screen we have about 40 different angles and pictures taken of it, and I guess comparison images next to it.
Sure.
I see a lot of people like to put, well, we'll just loosely say a picture of Christ next to it to compare it, but
well, and you know, look, there are many sculptors who have sculpted beautiful sculptures of the man of the shroud based on the image of the shroud. So there are many of those out there that are familiar. Some of them are in museums and in shroud centers around the world. And there was a television documentary where my old buddy Ray Downing, who's a 3D image artist, mostly for animation for television, took my photographs in the Henriet 1931 photos of the shroud and reconstructed a 3-dimensional in the computer result of extracting the man of the shroud based on exactly what's on the shroud itself. And I think History Channel did a 2-hour documentary on that called The Real Face of Jesus. And it's you can find it online, I'm sure. But he did a wonderful job, I'm sure, as accurate as one could be using the technology of the time to extract the data from the shroud and then use that as a basis for his 3D reconstruction.
Wow. Hey, Barrie, I never asked you this question. I don't think I have, but I know a lot of people, I bet, want to. When you were with the Shroud, it was like 5 days, 24 hours a day, basically, right? And
Absolutely.
touring. What did you feel? Anything
Yeah, I actually
supernatural?
I
Yeah.
get that question a lot. Um, and I think that every one of us, no matter what our backgrounds and beliefs might have been, recognized that we were doing something of historic nature because this had never been permitted before. Of course, that also made it more difficult for us because there was no guidelines, nothing, no sort of path to follow. We were the guys sort of breaking the new ground here. But what was the question again, John? Sorry, train of thought just went out the window.
Oh, no, no. And did you feel
Join the
anything?
crowd, baby.
Yes,
Hey, look,
supernatural, a
I'm hitting.
psychic, supernatural, anything,
Oh
you
yeah,
know?
yeah, feelings. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'll need all the help I can get tonight, guys.
We
Um,
will do.
Oh no, you're doing great. I'll probably
well,
learn more about the Shroud tonight than I have in the last 10 years.
well, as far as the feeling goes, look, there's
Yeah.
no doubt that some of the guys who were Christians on our team certainly felt much more of an emotional response than I would have. I mean, I was raised in the Orthodox Jewish home, like kind of like Fiddler on the Roof. So God was part of everything every day. But to some people, certainly to devout Christians, and there were a few on our team, um, being in the presence of this cloth had to be something extraordinary for them. So, but for me, it was I had a sense of the historic importance of it, but we had such a filled schedule, and there was no time for sleeping in that 5 days and nights for me, because if I slept, I missed something, and I was the only documenting photographer. So I'm sure that others had more of an emotional response to it than I did. I was just concentrating on the extraordinary schedule that we had to follow to accomplish everything we wanted to do in that 5 days and nights. So I think a lot of the guys, maybe guys even who might have had that feeling, had to set that aside and sort of suspend your emotions while we did what we had spent 17 months planning to do. And that's exactly what we did. So it's a tough question to answer. And I'm sure if you ask some of the other guys, John, like John Jackson, for example, I'm sure he would give you a different answer.
Yeah, I know, because I remember when I went down and spent time with him. I got to tell you just quickly, my only, I would say, I don't want to say psychic experience, but interesting experience was, uh, remember there for listeners, so you couldn't take samples home of the Shroud, but sticky tape samples were allowed. Where like putting a piece of tape, the 3M company developed the special tape that you
Correct.
put onto the Shroud, right, and then the fibers came off. And remember the team that I founded with Paul Maloney. We had Max Fry. Well, we got access to the sticky tape samples. I think there were Ray Rogers, a couple of them, and
Some were Ray Rogers. We have those here now.
you have those. Okay. Well, one was actually a blood sample, and I
Yep.
remember uh, looking at it under the microscope in my
Well,
lab, and
well, as you know, Paul Maloney passed away a year and a half ago.
yeah, it was our best friend. It was my best friend out there,
And
and
he and I had been working together on three projects. One with the photomicrographs taken by Dr. Eugenia Natowski of the Ray Rogers tape samples. And then he was working with my photographs of Max Fry, who also took tape samples from the Shroud. And he then, for about 6 or 7 years, had the Max Fry tape samples in his possession. And he recorded over 5,035 millimeter slides through his microscope, and we have all 19 binders of those slides here. And well, one of our Stera projects is for me to start digitizing 5,035 millimeter photomicrographs of the Max Fry tape samples.
that was the biggest mistake I ever made in my life, because that just briefly, just to show you where I came in. After Stirrup came back from tour, and Father Rinaldi, who was the priest pretty much responsible for getting permission, um,
Correct.
actually was my mother-in-law knew him personally for decades, and I got to meet him, and he recruited me and asked me to form another research team, known as Assist, and bring in a lot of multidisciplinary people, because I gotta say, at that time, I think Stirp was very tight with their data, and we wanted a
Well,
research team that allowed people of all disciplines and nationalities and parts of the world to have access. So Paul arranged to buy for our team. This is when I was executive vice president and Fred Zuggaby was president, to buy the Max Fry collection, which we had in our possession, but we never, I think, came up with the money to pay our debt. So Paul had to sell it, and that was too bad. We should have came up with the money and kept it, because that's such a valuable collection.
well,
Where
the,
is that now? Do you know, Barry? Who has that?
yeah, it's in North Carolina. It's with Tom DiMahala, who was at one point president of the Stirp team. He was mostly our administrator guy, but it's with him. But he's really not an imaging guy. He's not a scientist per se. And frankly, those tapes are now 40 some years old. And you have
Mm.
to remember, Max Fry did not go to 3M and have 3M construct a special tape that would leave no sticky residue on the shroud like we had. He went and stopped off at the local dime store on his way to the palace and
I love the story. Yeah.
picked up the cheapest roll of sticky tape he could find. And unfortunately, every place he stuck his tape, he left some sticky gum that eventually, 20 years later, they had to clean it all off, which they did ultimately. So those Max Fry tapes, being on a very low quality tape to begin with, they degrade over time. And I'm fearful now that the degradation has gotten to a point where those tapes themselves might not be so useful, but 5,000 photo micrographs made when they were only 20 years old instead of 42 years old might provide an archive and a resource for researchers to evaluate what was on those samples. And it was done by Paul Maloney, who was quite good with a microscope. So
He,
they're quite good. And
he
they're all
was good.
original slides.
Yeah. In fact, I met Walter McCrone at a seminar at 3M, because I knew the microscopists there, and they
Right.
invited me. And we probably want to talk a little bit about that, because McCrone was known for
Yeah.
complaining or claiming the shroud as a painting, and maybe you can go into that and show exactly
Well,
why it isn't.
okay. Let me just go briefly because, look, Walter's passed away. I don't want to speak ill of the
Mm.
dead.
Oh, he was a
On the
nice
other
guy.
hand,
He was a nice
yeah,
guy. Yeah.
he was a very smart guy.
Yeah.
And in the end, I believe he knew darn well the shroud wasn't a painting, but he
Yeah.
could never go back and say, "Oh, I was wrong."
Yeah, I
And
agree with you.
I spoke with him. The last time I spoke with Walter McCrone was about a year before he passed away.
Mhm.
And honest to God, he said to me, "This whole shroud thing is driving me up a wall." And that's because he had painted himself into a corner. He could not ever say that he was wrong about it because he had committed so much to saying he was right about it. But the peer reviewed science that our team generated proved he was wrong. And so you have to give Walter, kind of a nod that look, because of Walter McCrone and his naysaying, he forced the Stirp team to do even better science, knowing that it was going to
I
have to
I
withstand
agree.
more scrutiny. So I have no ill will against Walter McCrone. May he rest in peace. He did what he did. He played a part in the story. His part in the story really motivated a bunch of other scientists to dig in deeper and try and do even better work. And I think because of that, we were able to prove Walter was completely wrong.
Yeah. And I do want to add that the time I spent with Walter, it was because he was considered one of the best microscopists in the world. He wrote the textbook on it. He was very kind to me, showing me, certain techniques. And this was at 3M, this a seminar.
Sure.
And he was just, in my opinion, he was a very gracious man. I didn't agree with his conclusions like you didn't, but I thought the world of him and his
Well,
contribution to
the,
microscopy. I think it
just
needs
so
to be
that the
said.
viewers don't think we're just being mean spirited here, let me qualify what was wrong with Walter's work.
Good point.
Number
Yeah.
one,
Go ahead.
yeah, number one, he only used a white light microscope and polarized light microscopy.
Right.
Now, that's a way of detecting particulates and even identifying some. But to be absolutely correct and to a scientific certainty, you also need to do chemical and spectral analyses before you claim you have that you know what you're looking at. Because certain things under the microscope, and I've done a good bit of it myself, microscopy work, certain things under the microscope are going to look very similar to each other, but maybe radically different.
True.
So chemical and spectral analysis becomes really critical. And Walter didn't do it, nor did he publish his work in anything but the journal that he owned and edited called The Microscope, where all of our team's work were published in journals like Applied Optics, which to this day is a very difficult journal to get your work into.
And they're
Because they
peer
have,
reviewed. This is
yeah,
important.
high
They're
standard peer
journals.
review, very high standard.
Well, guys,
Or-
let me take y'all down a different road here. How old was Jesus when he died? 33, 34, 33, right? I mean, all these pictures I'm looking at of the shroud, this guy's got to be 60, 65. I mean, when you look at his
Yeah.
face, the way it's cut, the way it's inset, the way the brow sets, the way the cheekbone sets, the way the jaw sets, this isn't a young man. There's no way
Well,
this guy's older
Joe-
than I am, and I'm an old dude. I mean,
Joe, let me throw something back at you to counter
Go
that
ahead.
argument, Joe. So let me start by beating you up the night before, not giving you any water, flogging you mercilessly, scourging you, not just on your back the way artists have depicted it. If you take a step closer and you're flogging somebody, you're going to hit the front of their body. This man's got scourge marks both front and back. He's then crowned with a cap of thorns and then crucified. I don't know how you would look after that, Joe, but
yeah,
I'm
I
going to
don't- I
look a
still
little
don't think he'd
older.
look
at
30
that.
years older. No, I mean,
Well-
the thing for me is when I look at his the cheek areas, it's not puffed and swollen like a man that has been beaten. It's
Oh, it
more
is.
inset,
You're-
more
I don't
sunk
know.
down, more
I don't know what
defined.
images.
I'm
I don't
looking
know
at
what-
images taken to the shroud. These are
Yeah,
actually
I know, but there's
literally
if
the
you're
latest
looking
ones.
online, Joe, I'm telling you that the research quality images are not online. Okay, and the cheekbones are both swollen, one more so than the other. And that's really clear. So if you're not seeing that, what you're looking at, then I'm not satisfied. You're looking at a very good
I
image.
think Joe's looking at the Henri photographs. I have it pulled up here.
Yeah,
So
but
the older
pulled
ones,
up on which website is it pulled up on, John?
Oh, it's-
Actually, these are photos taken. These are out of Italy. These were done, I think, by the Vatican. Actually, the ones that have them.
Actually, it's not the
See now,
Vatican,
these are done and they're in several different. I mean, several different shades, several different types of images.
Well,
these
I would
definitely are
say-
somebody's official photos. These aren't BS photos, but for some reason,
Well-
I'm not listening who took the photos. That's what I'm actually
Well,
looking
you know,
for. talking
let
about.
me add
That's
this,
not-
that,
that's not- hold on,
you
John.
know, there,
Oh
I'm
wait,
gonna,
let me
to
back
support
out of this.
Barry, what
Yeah.
you were saying is that,
John, that's,
remember,
I need to tell Joe something. That's not the point, Joe. It's not that those aren't authentic images. It's
Okay.
just we don't know how many generations removed they are from the original images, and that's where you
That's
can
true.
get into trouble.
No, I
That's-
agree. That's true. And I'll find them while we're talking because I'm there's so
Okay,
many. That's the
one-
problem. Though. While y'all been talking, I've been looking just because I like looking at the images
Sure.
of it. But
Well,
the
let-
problem
let
here
me-
is when I typed in pictures of the Shroud of Turin, there've got to be like 1.5 million of them come up.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
there are now.
ridiculous. I mean, it's ridiculous. Now I like these ones because these are put up by the different search engines, so they usually try to keep as official as they can. But
Well,
still,
One more thing you should know, that there's been something called an anthropometric study done of the man of the shroud. That's where they measure the arm's length and long bones of the body and compare them to anthropology tables of different people from different parts of the world. And they've determined this is a Semitic male in the age group 30 to 40 years of age.
and Barry, I was gonna add too, which, you know, Robert Buckland, who was, the chief medical examiner, and Fred Zugaby, all the medical examiners that actually, as far as I know, that studied the pictures, estimate the age was somewhere between like 30 and 45 or something. Isn't that
Yeah.
correct? And these are kind of
is.
experts.
Yeah, and look, I mean, understand this, that we each interpret what we see a little differently than the guy sitting next to us. So your interpretation is just as valid as mine, and that's why I go back to what the research has shown, and what
Yeah.
the experts who've studied the image and studied the body of the man in the shroud and what they've said. And look, I'm a photographer. I can only rely on my expertise really in the area of imaging. That's and in specifically analog imaging, which is different than digital imaging, because I had to shoot
That's
the
different.
shroud photographs on film. I had a 10-year-old kid at one of my lectures ask me if film was a USB device. So, you know, so
Oh,
we're
it's funny.
living in
One
a
of them
different,
things, man.
we're in a different era than the era in which many of these photographs were made.
Oh, no, trust me, I understand film pretty well because one of the research groups we work for does a lot of picture taking. But and we've been doing it for about 44 years, to be honest with you. But it's just when I look at things in here that are dead giveaways, because on the negative images, the mustache is white, which suggests that it's gray. It's that it's
No, it does
translucent,
not.
that it's not brown.
Wrong. Joe.
If you take a brown, if you shoot a dark brown, especially for the period where he was, because his hair should have been a dark brown or a black. If you shoot a dark brown and an infrared or any kind of purple or anything along those lines, it's going to come out almost white looking.
Joe,
It's going to come out. So if you're shooting another color, it's just great when your beard is gray.
forgetting.
Like when mine is gray, when we're not doing television, and mine's gray. If I get hit with any kind of color, it instantly turns white. It doesn't matter what it is. If it's a negative image, it gets so white that it's not even funny. I mean, it's a dense white. And we've seen it in a lot of other photos that we've taken of pictures over the years. It's just a common thing we see. And I mean, it's definitely in this photo. There is no doubt about it that it's in there.
You're
And
forgetting.
I got another question for y'all coming in from the audience.
Well, before you do that, I need to comment on what you just said.
All right,
Joe.
go ahead.
First of all, the shroud was not made with reflected light. So there is no color information encoded in that image.
Good.
So
yeah,
you
exactly.
cannot judge hair color or skin color based on the images of the shroud. So what you just said is correct. If this were made photographically, I would agree 100% with you. It was not made photographically. It is not the result of light reflected off of a body and recorded onto a substrate like film or a sensor or a piece of cloth. And consequently, we did not encode, it did not record any surface color information. That's a fact.
Barry, let me add something because this was my area of research. A simple way of saying it is that the density or the darkness of the image is related to the cloth to body distance, which
Exactly
means
right.
if your cloth is like covering the nose, which is almost zero distance, the nose is going to be darker. Whereas if the cheeks are farther away, it's going to be lighter. Is that a good way of explaining it, Barry?
And that's exactly right, that there is a direct correlation between the density in the image itself and the distance between the cloth and the body. Now, we can't do that photographically, and you can't do that with an artwork because you're implying distance in a photograph by highlights and shadows. That's how we photographers can imply depth and distance information. But there's physical distance information encoded in the shroud based on an interaction between the cloth and the body. And that's been proven, and it's published in peer-reviewed scientific journals, that there is absolutely no light involved in the creation of this image.
And that's what drives us crazy, because your image can't be explained by like a direct contact, and it can't be explained by diffusion. And it's like, right, Barry, there's really no one chemical or physical process that can explain this cloth to body distance density. It's crazy.
Yeah, the imaging distance was somewhere between 3.5 and 4 centimeters, and there was no imaging beyond that distance. So
it's amazing. Yeah.
That's why the sides of the body image just fade out as that distance increased between cloth and body. That was it. But if you look at the hands, there's a perfect giveaway that proves the point that light wasn't involved. If you look at the hands, there's kind of a halo around the hands. You might or might not see it depending on the quality of the images you're looking at. That halo is caused by the hands lifting the cloth further away from the torso. And so there's less imaging of the torso where the hands are, because they've moved the cloth away from the body almost to the maximum distance.
Interesting.
And you can see that easily, and that's the best example of it on the shroud. And by the way, shadows can't work 360 degrees around something.
Oh, no, I'll tell you what this really reminds me of. It reminds me of it's a passive radar they used to use in the Navy. It's actually kind of a combination of radar and it's like an EMP. It's really weird, but when they shoot it out, whatever it hits, it kind of cascades around, so you just see it. It's like if it's a plane or something, instead of seeing a blip, you actually see the shape of the plane. It's a little.
Were you in the Navy, Joe?
Oh yeah, stationed on USS Nimitz.
Yeah, 4 years regular Navy myself.
Myself, man, I love it. It was a different life. It's all I can say. It was
65 to 69. I'm older than you are.
Yeah, yes. I was in. Actually, it's funny. I was exactly 10 years after you. Same year as just 10 years later.
75, 79.
Yeah. So it was. I'm not gonna lie. I had a lot of fun when I was in there. I mean, it was crazy times. I worked on the deck of the carry on the deck of the carry, so it was always a blast. And there's always
Literally,
some crazy stuff going on out there.
yeah, literally a blast.
Yeah, it literally, yeah. I was actually because I was in advanced avionics and advanced electronics. That's where I got my bachelor's. And the thing about it, well, it's actually where I got my knowledge to get my bachelor's, is what I should say. I should rephrase that. But it was literally, I got to be a plane captain, so I got to do the deck, control everything in the deck, flights, elevators.
You were deck force.
Yeah, well, yeah, because what I did was, see, what happened is everybody gets their ranking, whatever they're going to be, like in electronics tech or fire tech, whatever. And then, of course, everybody's assigned other duties on board deck. So
Sure.
My duty basically was to make sure everybody was doing their job and getting the planes launched and teaching people how to do it without losing their freaking head or getting blown off the back of the deck. It was always fun. I mean, it could get hairy some days when they had us running like 24 or 30 hours straight, and everybody's just kind of in a daze somewhere. They've drank so much coffee, their whole body's trembling, hoping that they don't F up. But, they definitely made sure we were ready for any kind of craziness.
Oh,
I
yeah.
got to give them credit. But I remember we had some new radars that come in, and I hate using the word radars because it's not really what these things were. And I remember because the guy did a passive view of, it was, I guess it was it looked like it was a bust of somebody. But when they did it, when the image stopped, it looked completely almost 3D. It was very strange. It was so, and this kind of looks like, I don't want to say it looks just like it, but because I can make out, looks like strands of hair. It's almost like high def imaging. Even
Joe,
though I agree with you on with the no light, I don't see anything in here that I would consider reflective.
Right,
Or,
exactly.
but you know what I do see in some photos, and I hate to say this because I don't want to get these conspiracy people going. Sometimes, and maybe it's just the photo itself, it looks like it is like there was some type of energy. I don't know how to explain it. Because there's like waves across both his arms, especially one going up back up towards his shoulder, and then there's some other spots on his body, and then there looks to be like I don't know how to explain it, like a little lightning kind of jagged thing coming out from the top of his head. Might have been
Oh, that's
folds
a water
in the
stain, by
shroud.
the way, Joe.
Oh, is it? See, that's what I
That's
was
a
asking.
water stain.
Yeah, because I thought it might have been a fold or something like that. Because
No,
it
it's a
looks like it's
water
been
stain.
folded a few times.
Back in 1532, it was damaged in a fire that caused all the severe damage, and so they dumped water on it, and the water, as it spread out in the cloth through capillarity, carried with it particulates and dirt and stuff. And so the X-rays that we made of the shroud showed up the water stain peripherals. So there's material that's collected there, and it's right above the head. So that's what you're seeing.
I mean, I've heard people say they thought it was high def, like radiation imaging or something, but it just doesn't have that feel.
No, I don't
It,
think
it,
so.
it,
Well,
it does.
some people have proposed it, but it doesn't seem the evidence is there. Barry, it's the top of the hour. Can you give out your book information, your website, and anything else you'd like people to know about you and how they can contact you the best
Sure.
way?
Well, first of all, the website is shroud.com. That's easy enough to find. And it's been there. We're about to hit our 25th anniversary online in January this coming year.
Congratulations,
So
man.
we've been there a few minutes. I always tell people, if you go to the website and you're looking for something specific, use the search engine, which searches only within our website. I had to put it there because I could no longer find stuff that I had put somewhere, but I couldn't find again. So the search engine, I probably use it a half dozen times every day. And if you're looking for something specific and you know how to use the search engine, you'll find exactly what you're looking for by using it. I don't have a book for sale at this point in time, so I have nothing to promote other than
buy John's book. I'm sorry.
Mine's out of print.
well, I did a book in 2000 with Ian Wilson, but that's been out of print for about 18 years. So
they take books out of print anymore with all this.
Yeah, you can find them on eBay occasionally. You can find used copies.
I think my book's been out of print 30 years, Barry. I don't know, 20 years. But, Barry, one interesting thing, too. I mean, there's so much to talk about, but and maybe Joe has some questions from the audience, but the carbon 14, because when I ever talk about the shroud, even like at a cocktail party, the first thing that comes up is, hasn't it been shown to be a fake because carbon 14 dated it in the 13th century? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, if you don't mind.
Do you have to break at the top of the hour?
No,
No,
we're
no,
good. We're good. We're good.
no,
We
I
can taste
just,
them.
I
Okay,
wanted
well,
to
I
get
didn't want to get
information
started
and-
and then, have to get stopped again. So, all right, well, let's talk about it. 1988, they authorized radiocarbon dating of the shroud. Prior to the actual dating, about 7 or 8 laboratories came together at a conference in Turin to evaluate which radiocarbon dating process they were going to use and to develop a protocol for radiocarbon dating the shroud. The protocol originally called for multiple samples, for samples to be chemically analyzed before they're destroyed during the carbon-14 dating process, for the labs not to be in any way or shape in contact with each other during the process, and for them not to know which sample was from the shroud, in other words, being a blind study. Well, it turns out that sort of about a month before the event, they decided to cut it down to 3 laboratories. The 3 labs went on to get the samples. They were given the sample that was only one sample cut from one corner. They were given the samples. They violated every one of their own protocols. They knew immediately which sample came from the shroud. It was the only one with a 3/2 herringbone weave. All the others did not. So that immediately revealed which was the shroud. They spoke to each other on a regular basis. We have the documentation of that. They performed no chemical analysis on any of the samples, saying that since they knew which one came from the shroud, there was no need for them to do the chemical analysis, which was their own protocol. Now, perhaps if they had done that, they might have discovered that the one section that they cut a little piece from for dating had cotton interwoven with it, and that cotton had been dyed to match the color of the shroud.
Wow.
And the dye that was used was the rose madder dye from the madder root plant in a gum arabic base. And that chemical analysis was done by Ray Rogers, the lead chemist on our team from Los Alamos National Laboratories. So it's a pretty reliable chemical analysis. That means there was something anomalous about this only sample they used. And I've spoken to countless scientists over the years, and they've all said to me the same thing, that you can't claim a 95% certainty from one sample taken from one corner. Well, for 27 years, the laboratories refused to release their raw data. This is very unusual because usually in science, when you publish your work in a journal, then if some researchers want to access the raw data, you make it available. For 27 years, the labs refused. Now, during the process of the radiocarbon dating itself, the people in Turin appointed the chief researcher at the British Museum to act as the overseer of the 3 labs, a man named Dr. Michael Tite. Interestingly, before the results were published and released, they were inadvertently or accidentally or surreptitiously leaked to the press. The Oxford lab received £1 million, about $2.5 million in $88. They received £1 million, set up a new department, and Dr. Michael Tite left the British Museum and went and took a permanent chair at Oxford with some of that money.
Wow.
So when people tell me, oh, the carbon dating is infallible, look, here's the thing. When Ray Rogers made the discovery and published a challenge to the radiocarbon dating in a chemical journal called Thermochemica Acta, not one we all read every day, he published that work. That was the perfect opportunities for the labs to step up and say, look, we didn't pick the sample site. We didn't cut the sample. We took what they gave us and dated it. Why did they not speak up? Because they didn't want anybody looking over their shoulders to see how they had violated all their own protocols. They didn't want a bunch of other scientists involved. And so they did it. And here's the sad part of it. This whole thing ultimately led to turning radiocarbon dating into a multi-million, if not a multi-billion-dollar a year industry worldwide.
That's true. Yeah.
And nobody bites the hand that feeds them. So they'll never admit they did anything wrong. I've been to the Arizona lab and spoke with Dr. Timothy Jull, whose name is on the radiocarbon dating paper. He was just a a grad student there at the time, but his name's on that carbon dating paper. He participated. He's now the director of the Arizona lab. And even he admitted to me that, hey, it was kind of a shoddy procedure and probably should be redone. This coming from one of the directors of the lab, one of the guys who signed off on it, back in 1988. So we now have 4 peer-reviewed papers challenging it because 2 years ago, a French researcher, Tristan Casabianca, who also happens to be a legal student as well as a Shroud student, went to England and used the Freedom of Information Act and forced the British Museum to finally release the raw data. As soon as that happened and he got his hands on the data, he went and enlisted the aid of a very well-known Italian Shroud scholar, Emanuela Marinelli, and 2 other scholars who were experts at analyzing the statistical data of the radiocarbon dating labs. And they determined that based on the fact that there's a gradation in the sample site that they chose, in other words, you get one date at one end of the strip and a dramatically different date at the other end, that there's something anomalous there, and there's no way that that sample could yield an accurate result for the rest of the cloth. The end.
Isn't there too, because with carbon-14, there's things known as rogue samples. Certain objects don't lend themselves to carbon-14.
That's true.
They could test, like some experiments, they tested a modern shell, and it turned out to be 4,000 years old, and whatever. The second thing, Barry, I have a question for you. I remember when I was involved in it, which I'm really not anymore, but I think it was Garza Valdez thought there was bacterial contamination that could make it look more modern.
He called it a bioplastic coating, but
that's it. Yeah.
Unfortunately, by his own formula, the shroud would have to be 60% by weight bioplastic coating.
Oh, okay.
And so his theory was evaluated and ultimately rejected.
Okay.
And here's the thing, you can see the photomicrographs that Mark Evans made in 1978. There's no bioplastic coating on those fibers, so you would see it. It's the same stuff that if you go out on the desert, it's called desert varnish. It's like a hardening of the surface. And it's the same thing. It's a bacteria, apparently. And although there may be bacteria on the shroud, they pretty much killed all that when they treated the box that was in at the time with thymol that would kill anything that lives. So that is probably less likely a problem now. But the bioplastic coating theory was ultimately rejected because the evidence didn't show that any of it was there.
Joe, do you have any questions from the audience?
Actually, the audience has lost their mind, man. They like talking about Nephilims and all crazy stuff.
Yeah, that's not my department.
I'm kind of with you on that one. I was like, because somebody keeps going about it, I can see 6 fingers, and I'm trying to count them. I was like, I don't see 6 fingers there, but
no.
I said,
actually, you can only see 4 fingers. The thumbs are hidden either because the median nerve was pinched by the crucifixion nails, or they're in their naturally retracted position. If you stand up and relax your hand and drop your hand to your side and then look at the outside of your hand, your thumb is pretty much being hidden by the rest of your hand. Oh, yeah, so there's a debate even about that. Is that because of the median nerve, or is it just because it's a natural position we just don't see the thumb?
And I noticed, like in chat, they're really split between, they think it's the shroud, they think it's an image of Christ, and some of them just thinks it's something entirely different. And a lot of people just don't think that it comes from, it dates that far back. And then I'm watching all kind of theories going across from radioactive stuff to all kind of dipping and bleaching.
My advice, Joe, my advice to anybody who's listening, if you really want to dig in, you really want to know the real science of the shroud, forget all the internet nonsense, go and read the peer-reviewed journal papers that our team wrote based on direct physical examination of the cloth. And when people say, oh, well, we bias the results, when I point an instrument at that piece of cloth and I push the button to take a reading, that instrument doesn't care if I'm a Christian, a Jew, a Muslim, or a heathen. It doesn't matter. It takes the reading and it gives you the data, and the data is published. So anybody who has doubts, go read the real science based on direct physical examination of the cloth by a group of real scientists, and then you can make up your mind based on that.
I love that. Barry, I also say to people, again, What the shroud is probably the most studied relic in the history of the world in terms of time, money, energy, manpower, and we still don't know how the image was formed. That is total. It's been 40 years or more. That's
Well,
amazing.
I know I've had many debates with the skeptics and stuff, and they say, well, it's a painting. I said, well, then where's the paint? Because there is none. I mean, we looked for paint. We had with us, believe it or not, Ray Rogers had the spectral, what's the word I'm looking for? The spectral
The way
characteristic.
this thing, but really, when you look at this thing, it looks like that the image came from the inside out. It don't look like it came from the outside in.
Well, some people believe that. We don't
Well,
know.
that's interesting.
Well, no, I don't. I'm just saying it looks like
But
that. It doesn't mean that's what happened. It just has
yeah,
that
we
look
just
to it.
don't know. Look, the spectral characteristics of what we did are very clear. That if we had with us, like I said, the characteristics of every paint and pigment used by humans from medieval to modern times. So if we found them on the shroud, we had the notebook full of all the spectrographs that showed all the different compounds that might be detected that were paint or pigment based. There is none anywhere
Well,
on the
it
cloth.
doesn't. Well, I don't know why anybody would think it was paint. It doesn't look like that. It really looks like something that had penetrated the cloth, one way or another. It's something that the image itself seemed to has passed translucently passed through the cloth.
Well, you
It
say
doesn't. I don't think it has anything to do with light. I mean, I guess maybe, but to me, it just seems
no,
like
it doesn't. No,
something. It just seems like some kind of energy
well, we
because
don't know.
something
And
attaches image to the cloth.
look, because I'm not a card carrying scientist, I
You
can
know what?
easily.
You know what I just thought about Barry, and I should have thought about this at the beginning of the show, guys and girls. There's some pictures of Nagasaki, actually Hiroshima, where people were standing in their clothes. You can actually not only see like some of them, their clothes pattern itself was actually melded to the body, but in some cases, the body itself actually left an image. But it only did it on two color clothes for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe it
It
was something
also
it was
left a
made out.
shadogram. There was a very famous photograph of a big round valve that was
Oh yeah.
blasted and left a shadogram of itself on the wall behind it.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's very wild when you see this stuff.
But
I mean, I'm not. Whoever wrote me
but
that. No, I'm
that's
not saying that's what happened with this picture. I'm
no,
just
that's
saying we're just
different than
talking
what's
about.
on.
Yeah, we're just talking about things like that could be like it, but I don't know. I mean, yes, Gene, it could be some kind of weirdness that vibrated out from the body. How do I know? I wasn't there.
Well, that,
I
None
that's
of
was.
what
us.
that,
I
that's what
wasn't
a
even a
lot of
thought at the time.
that's what a lot of I would say, and I'm a scientist, so I stay out of this area. But people that have the faith that Jesus resurrected from the dead postulate that maybe it was some type of resurrection energy. And
That don't
there,
explain the
there,
backside of the image.
Well,
there's
wait a
scientists
minute.
that actually have proposed X-ray, gamma rays, Ray Gary, the whole gamut of stuff. But
Well,
no
they
one,
do, but
you know,
you
what did
know,
you think of those? Yeah.
well, I look. X-rays, we would, if this were an X-ray, it would not look the way it looks. X-rays
That's
don't
true.
look like this. And
That's
we X-rayed the shroud. We have, as a matter of fact, Stera, our nonprofit, has one of the two sets of X-rays shot in 1978.
Now,
So we
this is
actually have
way
the
too
X.
much information. Maybe an MRI might be closer, but X-ray, there's
And
way too much information in this picture for any kind of X-ray. I
yeah.
mean, it could be some type of MRI, I guess. I don't know. Even MRIs don't seem to be
I don't
quite
know,
this
here's
deep.
the thing: where did they get an MRI even 700 years ago?
Hey, look, I'm still trying to figure out how the Dogon knew that there was a star that orbited around its orbit every 55 years,
And
300 years
and the
before we
only
could see it.
answer to that, Joe, is mathematics. Apparently,
Yeah, apparently they had some kind of advancements going on. Somehow I know they could see a star that nobody could see until we had a radio telescope and figured out its orbit and set their calendar up to a 55.5-year orbit. Things like that always fascinate me because it's real, it's been documented, but nobody knows how it happened. And this is the same thing. Nobody really knows how this happened because a lot of people were, when I first seen it come out, everybody's like, "Oh, it's a hoax! It's a hoax! It's a hoax!" Somebody hoaxed it way back in the day. They didn't think anybody tried to hoax it today. They thought it was hoaxed no, like 1,500 years ago or something. I don't know who. None of us were there. We don't really know. And I would love to think it was Christ, people. I really would. That would be good, solid
well,
evidence of his existence. But
well,
I'm not going to
let
jump to that
me.
because he might get offended when I go to the other side and say, "You dumbass, that wasn't me. What are you, stupid? You can't tell what I look like." I don't want to go there, man. That's not my job. We'll leave that
Well,
to the Pope.
let me point something
Go ahead.
else out. That, something reference to what John just said. So a lot of people say that, well, of course, we understand the resurrection did this. Well, I have to point out that the man on the shroud, according to the forensic experts, not my opinion, is dead. So if this has anything to do with the resurrection, it's a pre-resurrection image.
Yeah.
If it were a post-resurrection image, he wouldn't be dead, would he?
Well,
So
this is a combination, like aura photography. Supposedly, it's a picture of a physical body and the energetic body. So maybe the physical image produced an image, and then when he
well,
resurrected, that produced
yeah.
a variation of it. So I don't think that necessarily rules out a resurrection composite to it. But who knows?
I'm
I
not,
mean,
John.
speculation. You know.
I'm not ruling out the resurrection possibility. I'm just saying that if that's what one believes, then what do you care what the science says? Who
That's
cares?
true. What do you
Well, no,
care?
it doesn't gamma
It's a
rays.
damn good point.
Didn't somebody do some work with like gamma rays and I don't know what, but it looked pretty close. Not exactly. I didn't see. I haven't
No,
kept
no, that was Dr. August Dacetta, and he injected himself with I don't remember the
Oh yeah,
radioactive,
yeah. I
and
remember that.
then
Yeah,
he put himself into a gamma scanner, which is a scanner,
okay.
medical scanner,
Yeah.
and was able to kind of come up with somewhat of an image. I wouldn't recommend him doing that very often. It's not really healthy to
That's
do,
what I was thinking.
but he did it, and he came up with something. But here's the other problem with that: they didn't create an image on linen using that technique. They created it on the screen of a gamma scanner. What
Okay.
does that have to do with either a medieval or a first century image? Nothing. Sorry.
Yeah.
So even though it was an effort to use radiation to see if that might be a result, and maybe it is, but we don't know. And like I said, not being an academic, I can sit here on the radio with all your listeners, and I can say that the only honest answer about how that image is formed is we don't know.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. You know, you remember I just to throw in, I had a theory because it followed the Voltwinger, who was a guy who studied plant images in old books. That
Yeah.
if you put a plant in an old book, after maybe 50, 100 years, it forms an image. And I did a spectral analysis on that, a UV, which matched the shroud's color and ultraviolet characteristics. And I was the first one to do a 3D reconstruction of it, which looked very similar to the shroud face. Now, that doesn't mean I could show how the image was formed, but I think it could give some insight because those images are usually produced by lactic acid oxidizing the
I was just going to
cellulose.
say
Yeah,
that
go ahead, Barry.
more than one thing can oxidize the surface of linen. And by the
Good
way,
point.
Joe, you said something a minute ago about the image penetrating. Interestingly enough, it lives on the top 2 or 3 microns on the top surface of the fibrils and not penetrated at all.
And
So
the
it's just the
Voltwing,
very,
yeah.
very, very top of it.
And the images I
Just the
did
top of the
were
fiber.
deep. They penetrated into the paper. So that's
So
the
it's on the
problem
top
with it.
side though. Is that what you mean, Barry? It's on the top side of the shroud, not so the furthest part from the body is what I'm trying to
No,
find out.
no, there's nothing on the other side.
So wait, but it's what I'm asking
Only
you. The side with the image was the side touching the body or the side
That's
facing away
correct.
from the body?
Yes,
That's
that's
correct.
right, yeah.
And where it was directly in contact, the image is darkest. And as the distance increases, like the eye sockets, the hands lifting the cloth away from the torso, you'll see the image is more faint in those areas, up to about 4 centimeters, and then it stopped. And that's why we know it wasn't made by light, because nothing can attenuate light over 4 centimeters. You're going to get the same reading of light at 0 centimeters as you will at 4, because it's traveling at 186,000 miles a second.
Yes, it is.
So light can't be the mechanism. Something caused the differential between the body and the cloth based on distance. Photography doesn't do that.
And if you try to use the mathematics of, let's say, diffusion, it doesn't work. You don't get the
Well,
resolution that you see on the shroud. Didn't John
John,
Jackson show that? I thought in a paper
well,
years ago.
actually, I don't necessarily agree with your last statement. Diffusion is not completely ruled out, although Ray Rogers initially ruled it out right at the beginning because that was a theory proposed by a researcher back in the 30s named Vignon.
Paul
Okay.
Vignon, yeah, right,
Yeah.
yeah.
Vignon said it might be a vapor graph, he called it. So
Right.
Ray Rogers rejected that because he said, well, the image is too defined for the vapors. However, in later years, he changed his mind about that, but nobody ever mentions that, even though it was published. He changed his mind because he began to believe that in addition to the gases escaping from the body, causing a chemical reaction with the amines in the body with the starch on the surface of the cloth that discolors the cloth and yellows it. It's called a Maillard reaction. But he felt something else was at play in addition to that that kept those gases, if you will, collimated more and working in a more vertical manner. But he died before, and he was exploring that. He had actually put in a call and wrote letters to Dr. Arpad Vass, University of Tennessee or Georgia or someplace. And it's an external forensics laboratory where they put bodies in the trunks of cars and bodies in back seats and bodies in the sun and bodies under leaves and bodies in the stream, and they measure and they take all the data and they distribute that to forensic pathologists around the world so they can use that as a basis for solving problems or crimes they might be facing. So those
Yep.
things,
Hmm.
are out there.
That's interesting. I never heard about that, but as a biochemist or biophysicist, the collimate diffusion, I never heard of how that could work. That fascinates
Well,
me. I'd like to learn more
there
about that.
was a follow-up, some research done by a guy named Robert Villarreal, who was a physicist at Los Alamos National Laboratories, a
Oh,
colleague of Rogers. He Rogers gave him a sample to look at 1 week before he died, and after Ray died, uh, Bob tried to return the sample to Rogers' wife, but she was too distraught, and then it just kind of slipped his mind until I inherited the Rogers materials. And once I got the contents of his computer, there was a sample missing. I got all the samples but the one he had sent to Bob Villarreal.
oh
And so
wow.
I actually called Los Alamos and asked for Bob Villarreal. Now, this is a weapons lab. You don't know that you're even going to be able to do that. But I just put on my deepest, most professional voice and asked for Bob Villarreal. And he gets on the phone
I
and we
see.
start talking. And of course, he still has the sample. He's a good scientist, not going to throw it away. And he said, so I asked him, I said, look, if Ray Rogers picked you to give that important sample to, would you be willing to continue your work, but working with me in his place? And he said, I'd love to. He said, as a matter of fact, we have 2 new instruments at the lab, Los Alamos, that weren't even in existence when Ray was there, that might give us further information. He and 7 other Los Alamos researchers went through all of Rogers' materials and 100% verified every one of
No
his
kidding. I didn't
conclusions.
know that. That is
It's
amazing.
on shroud.com.
Wow. Wow.
Mm. So there's plenty of evidence out there that, for example, that the radiocarbon dating sample was just a poor choice of a sample. That's all.
I
That
was
it,
down at Arizona too before I actually met with the who was the director at the time? Was that Damon?
Donahue, Damon and
Donahue.
Don.
Okay. And they gave me a tour. This was actually before they received the samples. And
Right.
I've got to be honest, I was very impressed. But now looking back, you've really shed light on how they really screwed it up. It's amazing. And I can't believe they held back the raw data for what'd you say, 27 years or
Honest to God,
something?
yeah.
That's not very
27 years.
scientific. Wow. That's just
Well, what do they have to hide other than the fact that that revealed that they went way really yield? I mean, they extrapolated far beyond what that sample could yield.
well,
That's all.
you gave the best explanation on why the carbon 14 is I'm trying to use a word that's not a swear word. It's not valid. And this is great, Barry, because other people that listen to the show and then in the archives
Well,
really get a clear explanation. So I appreciate you doing that.
let me interject another little piece of information that might be important. If there's anybody out there who is sincerely interested in digging into what really happened with the carbon dating of the Shroud of Turin, there's a new book coming out by Joe Marino, the man who started this whole thing, he and his wife, Sue Benford,
Oh, I
who
love
started
him.
this
Yep.
whole question of the the quality or validity of the sample site chosen. He's got a new book coming out. I'm sorry I don't have the name in front of me. My apologies, Joe. But it will be coming out in October, November. We'll feature it, of course, on Shroud.com. As soon as that book comes out, it will become the definitive reference of what occurred during the radiocarbon dating of the Shroud. And so anybody who's really interested, snag a copy of Joe Marino's upcoming book in October, November, somewhere in that range this fall, and get ready, pack a lunch, pack a snack. You're going to be there for a while. But if you're really sincerely interested in knowing the details, they're all there. And it's, wait till I tell you how many pages. It's over 500 pages.
And Joe, Sue passed away, but
She
I
did.
know Joe's still a friend of mine, even on Facebook. And what a wonderful man. And Sue was wonderful too.
Yep.
I'm looking forward to that because I think I didn't know that. You told me about the book when we spoke a while ago. And any other books you recommend, Barry? I'm sure it's a good question. People
Well,
listening.
at this moment in time, there's a book list on Shroud.com that's the definitive book list of Shroud books. And any book that's recent or more recent or that's still available online, we have a link to it on Amazon or wherever, or the publisher, wherever the book is being sold. But it is a complete listing of just about every book that's been published on the Shroud in just about every language, going back to I think the first book is 1500 something. They're all listed on Shroud.com.
Pick one or two. People always say to me, like, "What if I'm in write books on magic or this?" I say, "Give me a name of a book or two that I could start."
Well, look, the books of Ian Wilson are quite good always. Ian is a writer, but a Shroud scholar, historian. He and I co-authored a book in 2000 called Turin Shroud, The Illustrated Evidence.
Oh, that's an excellent book. Yeah.
That's still, like I said, it's way out of print, but used copies pop up out there because people bring them up to me to sign them when I'm speaking in person often. So they're out there.
Is Joe's book called Wrapped Up in the Shroud? Or is that
no, that's his first book. And
okay.
And a revised edition of that just came out recently, and we of course have that on our website. This new book is the one that's about the radiocarbon dating, and I just saw the cover of it today for the first time. It's got the famous photo of the three researchers sitting in front of the blackboard with the dates 1260 to 1390 exclamation point on the blackboard behind them. That's the cover photo on the book. So we'll be putting it on Shroud.com as soon as the book becomes available, probably in October.
Oh, I think I found it. It's if this is correct, I think it's actually on your website. Radiocarbon dating of the Turin Shroud, new evidence from raw DNA. Is that the one?
Nope.
Oh,
Nope.
Twice I failed. I'm giving up.
That's a paper, if I'm not mistaken, and not a book.
Oh, okay. I was just because that's fantastic. Barry, what would you like to add? Anything that I guess we haven't covered that you feel is important?
Well, Joe, if you've got, I'd be happy to answer some questions.
Actually, I've been looking at a couple of questions that while you were talking. First off, I don't know what this thing is about the fingers. Do they look extra long to y'all or something? It's making me crazy. I've got like 10 questions about this.
Well, yeah, no, they do appear long, but you also have to remember this isn't a photographic image. It did not capture what was there precisely the way a photograph would, and consequently, any slight draping of the fabric could have caused that elongation. But when they did the measurements, according to the anthropometric study, they're not abnormally long. So they appear that way. And look, I'm going to quote my dear friend Ray Rogers one more time. Ray Rogers said, "I think I see" is not a scientific statement.
It's true.
And I get countless emails during the course of the year, hundreds of them, with people sending me pictures of something they found on the Shroud or on the back of their guitar or on the beam over their pew in the church or of clouds that they photographed. It's called pareidolia. It's the way the human brain functions with human visual perception. It takes anything that's a shape that may be familiar in our pattern memories, and that's what we see when we look into a random shape. and we're hardwired for faces, so everybody sees faces everywhere, because
Yeah.
that's built into our visual perception system. And perhaps it was there to, so parents could recognize their kids and save their kids or something. So I know that when my kid was a little guy, I could pick him out of a crowd at 100 yards. I mean, it's just the way we are. So one has to be careful about what they think they see. But the anthropometric study, which is published on shroud.com, by the way, you can read that, and you can read about the measurements that were done and the comparative analysis they
what
did.
was the height? I had a couple of people that asked how tall was it?
Okay, before I answer how tall he was, let me remind you of two things. Number one, it's on a piece of woven cloth that can be stretched in any direction. We found that out just smoothing it out and putting it on the examination table. Then they did a restoration of it in 2002, got rid of all the wrinkles. It's now 7 centimeters longer than it was when I photographed it. Okay. The other problem is this. As I've mentioned before, the image fades out at its peripheral. So where you start and end your measurement becomes a critical factor as well. So what I'm trying to get at is we cannot do precise measurements on the shroud the way we could if you were standing there in front of me and I had a tape measure in my hand. We cannot be that precise. The answer to the question, how tall, 5'10" or 5'11"?
Oh, that's pretty tall for back in the day.
Yeah, I hear that a lot, but they've found the remains of first-century Jews over 6 feet, so I don't think it's impossible.
No, I
The
don't
other
think
thing
it's possible by any means.
yeah, the other thing, if Jesus were extraordinary in appearance, wouldn't at least one of the gospel writers had mentioned what he looked like? Nobody ever did.
That's a good point. That's a really good point.
All I remember in Catholic Church was as they said he was ungainly looking, meaning he was ugly. They never said anything about him being beautiful. Even the church never said the images they used were Christ.
Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, my
That's
friend.
very true.
I've had people tell me, this can't be the man of the shroud. He isn't beautiful enough. I go, well, I'm sorry.
I don't think from from some of the stuff you hear, I don't know if he would have been all that beautiful. So I don't think it would have mattered if he was truly the son of Christ. I don't think beauty would have had anything to do with it.
Look, if it mattered at all, they would have written about it.
I agree. So it's one of them things that people kind of take out of context. And I noticed, what was that, Chris? Chris wants to know. No, hold on, Chris. I'll ask him. So I know that in some of the groups that looked at this, everybody was, I guess, had a faith. He wanted to know how many, I guess, non-religious people that had actually looked at as scientists that looked at the shroud.
At least half of our team were not religious at all.
See, there you go, guys. Goodbye. And let me tell you something. Just because you're religious, if you work for Los Alamos or any of the labs, I got several friends that work for a bunch of these labs. Look, they don't care if you're religious. All they care is you do a damn good job. And trust me, you don't get that job unless you're good at it.
Well, I get that criticism all the time. So let's run down a little bit of the list. There were 3 Jewish guys on the team: the blood chemist, an imaging scientist, and myself. Okay. There was 1 Mormon, Vern Miller, the chief scientific photographer. Ken Stevenson was an evangelical Christian, still is. There were a couple of Lutherans and Methodists. Ray Rogers, the chemist that I've been talking about so much tonight, his religious beliefs were so well below the surface that when I did the only interview he ever gave on camera to anybody, he did for me, I had to ask him, Ray, are you an atheist? And he laughed. He said, of course not. He said, but he was dying of prostate cancer when I interviewed him. He had had it for over 20 years. Yeah. And he said the pain of getting in the car to go to church every Sunday got so prohibitive that he just couldn't do it anymore. But he kept his faith separate from the science, as did most of these guys. There were a few who were overtly of faith, and maybe they were wearing a crucifix around their neck or something. But like I said before, when I point an instrument at the shroud and pull the trigger, it doesn't care what my religious background is. The data is what's there, and that's what's published. So you can interpret the data yourself. Anybody who's listening, go look at the data and make your own conclusion.
Spoke like a true scientist, Barrie. Love it.
Got to follow the data. Those guys yelled at me enough times. Rogers would call me up Hey, Rogers called me up once or twice and he said, "I just reading the website. You said something's proven. We don't have enough data to say it's proven. Change it." Okay, Ray, and I changed it.
Actually,
So
Christopher, we're on shroud.com right now. If you look up on the left screen, that's where it's at. Yeah, it's been up there for about a half hour now. Yeah, I've been going through it. That's their site. I've been going through sites that y'all, we're always fair to everybody. So lots of photos up there. Now you can see where I've been scrolling through this one. There's lots and lots and lots and lots of material here to look at, people.
It's
You can spend,
amazing.
well, like
You,
I
yeah,
say,
you
I
know,
was
you could spend lots of time here just looking around. Everything seems to function smoothly, so you can get in there. Look, I mean, everything you click, everywhere you go, there's data. So, or I should say, information might be another way to say it. And then
yeah,
you've got,
information, some data, certainly data.
yeah. And then I see what this is.
That's why I always
These
tell everybody, Joe, when you go to shroud.com, pack a lunch and a snack.
I can see that, and I like sites like this. When we
Yeah.
put up our very first website, I said I wanted to be a one-stop everything. I don't want you to have to go looking all over the internet. I want to put it there because I don't mind posting other people's data as long as it's legitimate information. So,
let me throw something into for somebody, not to advertise my website, but I have a shroud tour on my website, which actually photos supplied to me by Barry. It's called like a picture tour of the shroud. Takes about maybe a half an hour to go through on gizapyramid.com. Gizapyramid.com. Just click on Shroud of Turin on the left. And it's only about I think 5 or 6 pages, but it's basically was the talk I used to give Barry, years ago. I
Yeah,
kind of
and
put
it's
it up
still,
there.
we,
And,
I think
and
we still have a link to it from our site somewhere.
but thanks to you, you gave me permission to use those magnificent photos. But that could be a simple way to start to get a quick overview. And then, like you say, shroud.com is just amazing. And I bet you never thought it would grow to what it is today, right?
Look,
In your wildest dreams.
Look, in 1996, I had to go out and buy a book on how to write HTML code. Okay?
no,
And I
Joy.
had to study that and learn to write code because there weren't websites that built websites like we have
That's
now.
right. There sure ain't. There
And
wasn't
so
back
I
then.
still write code. What can I say? And I still do that website by myself. Everybody thinks we have a staff. I always get emails, congratulations to you and your staff on a great website. And I always turn to my 3 cats and I say, you hear that, staff?
You've done a good job. No, see, I love sites like these that are good, they're informative. You can go through it. They function pretty nice. It seems to be smooth while I've been going through. I've been clicking different things just to show people what's on it while we're going through it. Lots of information, people. I mean, really, you can spend quite a lot of time here going through. Well, if you don't agree with what you're reading, write to Barry and tell him why. And maybe he'll give you a reason to agree, or maybe he'll just not agree. I mean, because people are ornery these
Well,
days. I've been saying it for a while, but
look,
it never hurts to ask a question anyway, people, as long
You
as
know,
it's
think
a
about
Barry, you put news on it too. Any news of when the next
we're not we don't
exposition?
we're
The
not
next,
trying to be John, we're not trying to be a news site.
no, but just
Because
any information about like when the next exposition's going to be. That kind of news.
as soon as that news is released officially, then we would publish it. Yes.
There's no date, right? Or is there? I don't know. I haven't really followed.
There's a tentative date that has not been confirmed by the current Pope. Pope John Paul II
Yeah.
the devil
uh,
himself.
decided that they should show the shroud next at the next holy year of the Catholic Church, which is 2025. How many Jewish guys know that, do you think?
Yeah.
Shit.
Interesting.
Anyway, in 2025. So most people believe that whoever the Pope is at that moment in time, usually a year and a half or so beforehand, that Pope will honor his predecessor's wishes. And it makes sense. It is the holy year of the church. So it's a Jubilee type year. And it makes sense. They've done it on previous Jubilee years, 2000, for example, which was the 2000th anniversary. So as soon as that information is transmitted to us, we'll then do a special update to let everybody know when it's coming.
It'd be great if to allow any scientific studies, maybe an opportunity for a brand new research team with new people, new blood, younger people to really put something together like Stirrup did in '78. I'd like to see new people though, new innovative.
John, the Stirrup guys are dead. Okay, half of them, more than half are dead, and the rest of us are real old.
Yeah, I know.
So,
me too.
so it's going to be a new group, another multidisciplinary group like what we did, but I'm not holding my breath. I'm not expecting that to happen in
Yeah.
2025
I-
even.
Well,
I
we got a gentleman writing in from Bigelow Aerospace, and he's actually at work right now in California, and he's listening to the show, and he's kind of like, he said, why haven't they recarbonated? Is it a money issue? He said, if it's a money issue,
No,
maybe
no, it's not a money.
they just won't allow it. Is that what it is? That
Yeah,
the Pope won't
see,
allow it? They're like, no, or the church, I should say, won't allow it.
well, let's be clear. First of all, it's not officially the church. When King Umberto died in 1983, he didn't leave it to the church because he understood it would take 130 cardinals to vote on anything. He didn't feel that was efficient, so he left it to the living Pope. So at that moment in time, once the will was probated in 85, John Paul II became the first legal owner outside of the Savoy family in 500 or so years. Now, it's up to the Pope to authorize an exhibition, not the church as an institution. And so I wanted to be clear on that. As far as another carbon dating goes, you have to remember that the carbon dating process physically destroys the sample. It burns it
Yeah.
until it's carbonized, and then the gases of that carbonization process are what are measured for the radiocarbon dating. So because of that, they're hesitant to, chop pieces up. All of us would like to see another dating done, but I personally believe that, maybe it serves the church's purpose best to just let it be a mystery,
Oh, I
because
agree.
this,
I agree. It's
yeah,
much better for
and
them to
and
leave
and
it
I
the way
think
it
that
is.
may well be the case. And look, I'm not being critical when I say that. I'm just saying that
No,
this is
that's
the
fact.
church. They're not a scientific organization. They're less interested in the science and more in the evangelization process, the spiritual process. I understand that. I respect that.
And
But
this is a
being,
powerful thing.
yeah, but being, part of the first scientific team to do this, I would love to see a second team follow up with what, from what we did using 21st century technology. Some of the instruments we had took big carts on wheels to move them around. Today, they're small handheld instruments that are far more sensitive than what we had in 78. Although what we had in 78 was the best that there was available.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
then, yeah.
that would be tremendous, Barry. Barry, you got to tell the story when Hitler, well, the shroud from 1939 to 45 during World War II was hidden in southern Italy. Can you tell the story about that? Actually, Hitler
Sure.
came out and tried
Yeah,
to find it, and how they almost found it in the altar. That whole thing. I love that
yeah.
story.
Hitler had this thing for the occult. He was looking for the spear of destiny, and he was looking for the Shroud of Turin. The other problem with keeping the Shroud of Turin during the war was Turin is an industrial city. That's where Fiat was, and they were making tanks for the Nazis, or helping. And so they were fearful of bombing Allied bombers that might destroy it. And they were also fearful that Hitler might come in and get his hands on it. So they moved it to a monastery in Mont Vergine, and it stayed hidden there with only one person at that monastery even knowing it was there. And once the war ended and they went to retrieve it, they had a special showing for the monks that had been walking over it. It had been hidden underground. They'd been walking over it for 4 or 5 years. And so they had a special showing before it was brought back to Turin. Now, when King Umberto left it to the living Pope, there was only one stipulation, that it must remain in Turin forever. It will always be in Turin, which was the seat of power of the Savoy family when they were the monarchy of Italy.
I love that. I love that story. And anyway, I don't want to get into it, but the Cardinal Fossati, who was involved with bringing it to both places, I have actually a sealed envelope from him with some information and stuff. So
Right. Right.
I want to follow up on that with you, Barry. But has this transformed your life in any way?
Well, yeah, it has. Not in the way that many of my Christian brothers and sisters would like, I'm afraid. I get evangelized a lot, which is
Really?
fine. But look,
Funny.
here's the thing. I can understand, when I first started going public about this after the website was online for a few years, people were asking me, what do you believe? And they weren't talking about the shroud anymore. I didn't have a very good answer. I kind of walked away from Judaism as a kid and had my bar mitzvah because I promised my grandfather, who lived with us, that I would. My family is all born in Poland. I'm first generation in the U.S. And so, so I had that bar mitzvah and walked away the next day and didn't look back until I was in my 50s, and the website was up, and people were asking me that question, and I wanted to give an honest answer. I mean, that's what this is all about. It's just for me to tell the truth, and that's easy. I don't have to remember what lies I might have told yesterday to keep the old lies going. You know how that
That's
goes.
right.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
like keeping ping pong balls underwater. Good luck. Uh, and ultimately, I wanted to give an honest answer. So for the first time, I think as an adult, instead of looking externally for faith, I mean, I've been to a mass at the Holy Sepulchre in Bethlehem, in Jerusalem, and Nazareth.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
but instead of looking externally like I had done for so many years, for the first time, I looked within myself. I was raised, like I said, in an Orthodox home. My grandparents lived with us. My grandfather got up every morning and put on the tefillin in the prayer shawl and did his morning prayers. We lit all the candles at the appropriate times, Friday evening and things. Um, so God was part of everything every day, but I was offended by what I perceived to be hypocrisy, which I've seen now in all the great religions, all of them. So I kind of walked away. But anyway, one day I just sat myself down and said, you know, you got to come up with an answer. People keep asking the question. You have to know what you believe. And for the first time, I looked within myself. And sure enough, I found that my faith had always been there. I just hadn't acknowledged it.
Hmm.
And I said that to a friend who was a priest, and he just laughed and he said, well, you know what Jesus said? And I said, no, what did Jesus say? The kingdom of God is within us. And I said, well, then I have to agree with him on that one, because when I, for the first time, looked within myself, I found my faith had always been there. I just hadn't acknowledged it. So,
Beautiful.
how many Jews can say it was the Shroud of Turin that brought them back to their faith? I can say that,
That's
but
cool.
not the way my Christian friends would like. And look, when I get evangelized, I understand that's an expression of love. That's somebody wanting me to feel in my heart what they obviously feel in theirs. How could I be offended by that? So I am gracious about it, but I also tell them, look, I serve God exactly by being who I am and nothing else. And so this is probably who I'm going to be until the day I die. But I always tell them, hey, but I didn't know I'd be on this radio show here this evening. How do I know where I'll be tomorrow? So I always tell them, relax, I'm not dead yet.
Yeah, it's true, Barry. At our age, every day I get up, I thank God that I have another day. That's about as far as I can look ahead. Do you have any Oh, I would say,
John, you ain't got to worry about it, baby. Only the good die young.
yeah.
100,
Thanks a
30
lot,
years
Joe.
from now, you're going to die.
But
Then we're all okay, huh?
do you have any what do you think, wish lists that you want to do still with the Shroud that you haven't done?
Well,
Anything?
I think we've pretty much already discussed the fact that I would love to see another multidisciplinary team put together. And that's the other thing. We spent 17 months preparing a test plan that was submitted to the king that he approved to allow us to do our tests. So
Mm.
even if today they said, okay, submit your proposals. We could submit proposals. It would take however long it would take for them to review them. And then once a proposal might have been accepted and the go ahead given, then it would take a year, year and a half to put the team together, to bring together the technology, to raise the funds necessary to do this. You got to transport people and equipment. They got to sleep somewhere, take a shower occasionally. Uh, so, so
Yeah,
the
that's a good
expense
point.
of doing it is also considerable. So, but I would love to see that happen. I think there's probably
Me
not many
too.
researchers in the world of the shroud who don't feel that way.
Now,
Mm.
I know we're getting close to the end here, and I keep getting these same basic questions. They're asking the three of us basically: do we think it's Christ? Should you put stock into this? Do you? And this is actually directed at you, Barry. Uh, do you think that this, whatever this phenomena is, a legitimate phenomena and not some kind of faked
Look,
something from
you
back in the
know,
day?
put yourself in my shoes. I was a total skeptic at the beginning. I had no interest in the shroud. I had no emotional attachment to the subject matter. I had no connection to it other than the image and the study of the image. Do you think that I would be doing this today, that I would have spent 25 years collating all this great privileged information that I always felt privileged to be a part of that team and to collect and archive this data? Do you think I'd be doing this if I had any doubt left in my mind? I would never have started this. So I'm convinced, and remember, I'm not a Christian, so I wasn't convinced by a faith experience. I was convinced by the scientific evidence. And remember, I was privileged. I had access to all of it. And now you do too. And that's why I built Shroud.com, so that it says so on the front page of the website. Maybe the smartest sentence I ever wrote. It said, given the facts we believe, you have to make up your own mind about this.
Yeah, I like that. You know, whenever I used to give a talk, Barry, I always used to end it that science will never be able to prove this is the burial cloth of Christ, because you know you have to go back in the
That's
time
true.
machine. And the other thing is, I'm my answer would be a little different. I'm about 50-50 on it, actually. I've really flipped a little, but I'm more 80% if I based it on faith and inspiration and intuition. So I don't know. Maybe it's good to be like that because you're open, and I don't have any one theory that I support, so I don't
Well,
have any prejudice or biases. So, but I'm hoping more studies, like you say, are done. That's my wish because
John,
I think we just need to do it. You know.
think about this, John. If this cloth bore the image of any other human being that ever lived, we wouldn't even be talking about it.
Exactly. You know, that's a really good. My father used to say that. Isn't that funny? When I first started, when I he was my biggest supporter, passed away, and I always dedicate my work towards him. He said somebody must have thought this was important to preserve it, and
Okay.
he was a printer. I mean, that's very
Uh,
logical, right? So
all right. Let let me share a little story with you
sure.
about my little 80-some-year-old Jewish mother. Back, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, I was going back to a high school reunion in my hometown of Pittsburgh. I think it was our 40th reunion or something. And I
Mhm.
have some Catholic friends there, and they said, look, while you're in town for the reunion, why don't you give a shroud talk? And we'll just let that ring. I'm sorry about the interruption, guys, but it'll ring 4 times before it stops. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, it
Anyway,
happens sometimes. I won't be to worry about it.
it happens, and there's not anything I can do about it except bear with me for one more ring. No, he stopped at 3. He knows I'm doing something. Anyway, okay, so my friends went to the Archdiocese of Pittsburgh, and the Archdiocese thought it was a great idea, and they gave us a beautiful venue, and they put me on the
Mhm.
radio with Father Lengwin, who'd been on the radio for like 35 years, Catholic priest there in Pittsburgh. And we had this big event, and Ken Stevenson, one of our other team members who lived in Pittsburgh, came to the event, and my mother was there, and my brother and my cousins. You know how it is; the whole family shows up. And so we had a great time, and I gave my presentation, and we answered questions, and we were driving home, and my little Jewish mother was absolutely silent. And believe me, when a Jewish mother is silent, be afraid.
Yeah,
Yeah.
somebody's in trouble.
And so I finally turned to her. Now, this is a woman who emigrated to America, the youngest of 4 kids.
Okay, sorry, that was a little weird. That was very weird. What the hell happened? Well, guys and girls, I'm not exactly sure what happened there. We lost everybody just kind of at the very end of the show there. So we're gonna, guess we're gonna wrap up here in a second because I'm not exactly sure what just went down. But anyway, I know Kathy Belsky's coming up next, and I hope y'all enjoyed the show. Because again, like I said, I'm not sure what just happened. Everybody was good, and then next thing I seen is it looked like we had a hiccup or a disconnect or something. I'm not sure what happened there. But I hope y'all enjoyed the show tonight. I had a lot of fun talking with these guys, and I'm gonna try one more time to get them on before we leave because it definitely kicked us to the curb, and they're still talking to each other. Yeah, I don't think they know they've been dropped because they're probably still in the same queue together. Damn, coffee's good though.
Hey, is that you, Joe?
Yeah, I don't know what happened there, man. All of a sudden, y'all was talking, I was listening to you, and we're going on, and then blip, we were all three gone.
By answering this call, I put John on hold. Can he still hear us?
No, but we'll get him again.
You know how to get him
he
back?
made it back.
Joe, are you there?
Yeah,
we
now
got
we're
you.
back.
That was very weird, man. I don't know what happened there. It hiccuped.
Oh, I hit his icon and he came on. I didn't know I could do that. But I was just thanking Barry and wishing him the best. And maybe you want to add your
I
thank you.
think it was a great guest. There's a lot of interesting stuff out there. Remember peopleshroud.com. It's going to be up there. You'll be on the site so you can catch it for a while. Go check it out. There's a lot of information. No, I enjoyed the show thoroughly, Barry. When it comes to the Shroud, I've always been in the air somewhere because I don't really know what to believe about the thing. So, and believe is such a bad word anyway.
It has more than one connotation. I agree. Look, the way I see it is this. The answer to faith isn't going to be on that cloth anyway, but in the eyes and hearts of those who look upon it. So each person has to kind of come to terms with this for themselves. And I think that my goal was simply to give people access to the same information that ultimately convinced me, a non-believer in the eyes of Christians, that this has to be the real thing.
Well, there you go. That's when the guys working on it, guys. I would suggest that you find out as much information. I know we had quite a few people tune in tonight for this show that they wanted to hear it. So I had a lot of good feedback coming in. A lot of people really enjoyed it. I'd get out there and check it out, guys. That's the only thing you can do. Do your research, learn about it. Write to Barry, check it out. See what kind of answers you come to.
I'm getting about 400 emails a day, so I'm usually several days behind in answering everybody.
Yes, I can understand that. Well, guys, just be patient when you write. I always tell people that when we're online anyway. Be patient when people come on the shows. They get a lot of attention, so it always takes a little bit longer. But I thoroughly enjoyed the show tonight, and I know the audience listening did, except for that one little weird group we had that went off in some alien zone somewhere.
Well, there is paranormal in your title, so it's okay.
Yes, it is. Well, not in this title. This is Science and Beyond.
Oh yeah, this is science. I understand.
But it gets a little strange, which I don't mind. I mean, it's just sometimes when it was an alien that died and that was his soul going back to its home world.
Hey, you
But
know
you
what?
know, I'm not gonna argue with him about it,
I,
but still.
how can you argue against it? I mean, I guess that's just about as plausible as anything else.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. I'm not going to argue about it. And I've
Now,
said this a million times on air, people. Y'all know I'm not as near as religious as I was when I was young, but I've never needed an image or anybody to even tell me to, one, be morally right and morally just. And I don't need someone to tell me that there's a supreme entity out there other than us that might actually give a good, you know what. So I don't need to be told that. I don't need to be showed that. I don't need to see any pictures of anything. And I've always had issues with the pictures of Jesus anyway, because for where he came from, it just, you know, one, he wasn't dark enough, just to be honest about it. But anyway, it's just one of those things. I've always enjoyed these conversations. These are fabulous. And like I said, I knew the audience did as well. So, Barry, anytime, you know how to get hold of John. We're always looking
oh
for
yeah,
good
John
guests.
and I stay in touch.
We we'll love to have you back. And also, before I forget, want to thank Folgers Coffee for
Yeah.
sponsoring the show. We really appreciate it. It's really the best coffee out there, and
And
totally recommend it.
if you're getting like new information or books or anything like that, in November we do all through November we do a lot of pushing, you know, guests who have been on there who are writing books or are putting out lectures or putting out information, stuff like that. Going into the holidays, it gives people, you know, things they could buy or things they can share with other
Well,
people.
you know, you guys might consider having Joe Marino on that point in time because he'll have that new book out that's going to be an
Oh,
amazing.
I'll check with him. Maybe when his book comes out, we could have
Uh,
him on. And I do keep in touch with him, not
yeah,
as much
I'm
as you, but I'll contact him. Good,
I,
Yeah,
good
I, I'm
suggestion.
I'm
that's
betting
one
he's
of the
listening. I'm betting
right.
he's listening right now.
So one of the way I contribute to the holidays is getting people to have good guests, good books. There's not enough people reading books anymore, so I'm out there pushing them. I don't
True.
get any time anymore. I got to be honest with everybody. I tell people now when they get a new book, I ask them if there's an audio form or if there's a way I can a link they prefer, and I would translate it over because I do a lot of driving and I do a lot of radio stuff and a lot of construction stuff. So I'll just put in a CD or I'll put in a MP3 or whatever and just listen
Sure,
to it.
and just
It's
listen
just
as
easier. Yeah, and it's just easier for me that way. But I tell people all the time, I read. You know, there's nothing like having a book in your hand. My wife is a reading maniac. At one time before Katrina, we actually had about 3,000 books in the house, crossing every topic you could believe. And she just reads like she'll grab a book. Oh man, I remember the first time she had one that wrote Queen of the Dam. I'm like, babe, that's a thick book. It's gonna take you to. She was done next morning, man. It's over with.
Well, I
was
have
like,
about I have a stack of a good 20 books people have sent me just this year alone, and I just don't have time to read them all.
yeah, and that's another reason I ask people to send the audio because it's a much better chance that, like, if I'm taking a trip to Florida or if I'm going out to Texas or I'm going somewhere, I can put it in, you know, turn it on via my car and listen and enjoy it while I'm driving, and I'll get more out of it that way too because I won't be distracted by stuff in my house and my family or radio or something else. So it gets
Right.
my attention better. And that way, when I'm talking to a guest or a friend about it or something, it's a much better conversation. But yeah, anything like that is great. We always like that kind of information. I know we got Kathy Belsky coming in next with Quantum Leap. She's out of Hawaii, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, how lucky to live on a mountain in Hawaii overlooking the ocean with a 1,000-pound crystal. I don't know what the crystal's about, but it's still a great location to live. Is all I can say.
Yeah.
I live in the freaking swamp on the Gulf Coast. It's a little
Well,
different for me.
my house is sitting here at 8,300 feet in the Rocky Mountains.
Oh, see, that's
Wow.
not a bad
Sounds
place,
great.
man. Yeah,
That's
I'm
where
actually sitting below the sea level.
that's where social distancing is the norm up here.
Yeah, it is where I live too. It is on where I live on the Gulf Coast. We're not real good about getting up on each other. I think the next closest house to me is a couple of acres away on either side. Actually, on
Yeah,
one side, there's no
same
house.
here. Same here.
And I prefer it that way. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not an unsociable person. But I don't need to be mingling with all my neighbors and stuff. I got a busy life, and I like to keep to it. But I know we got to get out of here. Barry, again, I want to thank you for coming on. That you've been a great guest. Everybody enjoys. There's a lot of good information coming out there, and the site looks fabulous. I'm gonna spend some time there myself, just mingling around and looking around, and just seeing what's there. People, be sure you check it out. Shroud.com. Go over there, look at it, and write to Barry. Yeah, give him 500 emails. They should knock him up to about 700. Make him crazy like the rest of
Thanks, Joe.
them.
I'm just going to forward them all to you, Joe.
No, I'm forwarding to John. Don't feel bad. So John's gonna get him. I'm gonna send him. I'm gonna CC him over to John. But again, I want to thank both of y'all. And John, it's always great coasting with you. We always have a great time. And don't forget about